What's up everybody? Today I'm going to be taking you through some of my favorite hamstring builders, how to build your hamstrings if they're a lagging body part. And then at the end of the video, I just want to address a little bit of kind of recent controversy around pre-fatigue or pre-exhausting certain muscles and whether it's a technique that you should be using as well. So come follow along. I'm going to share some of my favorite exercises to start off with, and then we will dive into the rest towards the end. Okay, so hamstrings. I'm going to make this video as simple for you as I possibly can and give just practical advice that you can be using right away. So the way you should think about hamstrings is how they actually function, okay? So your hamstrings have two primary functions. That's hip extension. So for example, we think about like a Romanian deadlift, that's hip extension. And then they also have the function of knee flexion, okay? So your hamstrings are broken down into three components: your semimembranosus, semitendinosus, and biceps femoris. Your biceps femoris also has a short head as well. Now the short head of the biceps femoris is the only area of your hamstrings that is only involved in knee flexion, okay? Apart from that, everything is kind of that two joint muscle. It's working on hip extension and knee flexion. So that's why it's important to include both types of exercises to train both of those functions. So let's cover some hip extension to start off with. One of my staples, I call my meat and potatoes exercises, is a Romanian deadlift. Really big fan of these because, especially when it comes to progressive overload, it's really easy just to add those small little nuggets of weight onto the bar each week. Super stable exercise, provides that nice platform of which to train hip extension and build your hamstrings and obviously your glutes and lower back within that as well, all right? So Romanian deadlift, you can do this with a barbell, you can do this with dumbbells. You know, most of you won't need to be shown how to do this, but I'm going to take you through it anyway. Set up with the bar starting at the top. That's the main difference between a Romanian deadlift and say a stiff leg deadlift or a conventional deadlift off the floor. So we start with that bar in the top position. We take a step back. Now with this, what I don't mind is kind of the width of that stance. So some people might find it really comfortable to go into a really wide stance and turn their toes out just a little bit because they're more stable. I do find that work really well with a lot of people. Otherwise, it's feet about hip width apart. From there, you're looking to keep that bar as close to your thighs as you can, so shaving your thighs, and it's simply a case of pushing your butt back so your hips get out of the way so that bar can then travel down, okay? So if you notice, as I lower that bar down, all I'm doing is I'm pushing my hips back so my knees get out of the way so I can lower down, feel that big stretch in my hamstrings, and then drive my hips through and return to the top, all right? So that bar stays close to my thighs, all the way down, full range of motion, hips come through and drive my hips there, okay? So just one quick note on that. I don't see much of a benefit in squeezing your glutes at the top. Because that lever arm's so short because of where the load is, you don't necessarily need to be squeezing your glutes at the top. However, I do see some benefit to including that if you are trying to build your glutes up as well. Most of the loading with this when it comes to your glutes is actually in that lengthened position, that stretch position there, which is obviously where we're loading our hamstrings the most as well, okay? You know me, I can't kind of get through a video without mentioning glutes, so I had to mention that one as well, all right? So that's our first exercise, Romanian deadlift. Let's jump straight into the next exercise. Second exercise where we're going to be focusing on hip extension, or the hip extension function of our hamstrings. Now look, I'm going to keep it really, really simple for you today with kind of the meat and potatoes exercises. So I'll be honest, you know, we're not going to get into any real fancy stuff here. I just want to give you a bit of a framework of which will give you good benefits, good kind of growth from it before you start kind of getting fancy really, okay? So we'll go over those meat and potatoes exercises first, and then at the end I'll tell you kind of how to use them within your own training and kind of give you an idea about that. So meat and potatoes exercise, stiff leg deadlift now. So we've obviously gone over Romanian deadlifts. Stiff leg deadlifts are simply a high hipped deadlift off the floor. Now, off the floor doesn't necessarily mean off the floor, okay? What I've done for myself here, I've set a couple of 20 kg plates on the floor 45-pound plates, because for my range of motion, that works best for me. I'm not trying to fit myself to a certain mold of what someone thinks a stiff leg deadlift should look like, or a deadlift from the floor should look like. I'm doing the smart thing. I'm elevating myself a little bit off the floor just to work with myself, my own body structure, and what works well for me. We're gonna set ourselves with that bar about over the bottom of our laces. So kind of our lowest down laces on our shoes. If you're wearing Crocs, those don't count anyway, okay? Stop wearing Crocs. So we're setting it over the kind of bottom laces of our shoes. From there, keeping our hips up, our knees a little bit soft, but not locked, just fully soft. Hips stay up, grab that bar, engage our lats, create a little bit of tension, take some slack out of the bar, and then raise that bar close to your thighs. From there, we're allowing that bar to come out a little bit further in front than a Romanian deadlift, and all the way down to the floor, and repeat. So hips stay high, and then repeat. The Romanian deadlift, we're pushing our hips back. With this, think of it like kind of a bow over. So most people tend to feel this one a little bit more in their hamstrings, because obviously we're working through slightly longer lengths. Some people tend to consider this a little bit more hamstrings focused than, for example, a Romanian deadlift, which might be considered more glutes focused. However, actually, interestingly, a study from I think 2020, so relatively recently, actually showed a stiff leg deadlift has higher glutes activation than a Romanian deadlift. Now, activation doesn't necessarily mean it's a better exercise to build that area. It just means it's a little bit more targeted, a little bit more focused on that area. So don't necessarily see stiff leg deadlifts as more hamstrings than Romanian deadlifts. They're just slightly different. Within kind of my own programming and how I do things with my coaching clients, I might do a phase of, say, Romanian deadlifts, followed by a phase of stiff leg deadlifts, and then maybe cycle the next one back, or kind of layer in another variation if I want to. So it's not to say that a stiff leg deadlift or a Romanian deadlift is better than each other. They're just slightly different, right? So you can use both within your own training, or over the kind of the course of a few months, you know, over the course of a year or whatever, okay? So that's stiff leg deadlifts. That's our second hip extension focus exercise. Let's dive into our third one. Next up, back extensions. So I'm gonna show you the difference between a hamstring focused back extension and a glutes focused back extension. I wouldn't necessarily see these as on the same level as a Romanian or stiff leg deadlift for your hamstrings. But if you, for example, have like some low back issues or a lot of fatigue kind of accumulation in your lower back, then back extensions can be a really great alternative to those. Otherwise, these are more of kind of like tertiary or secondary kind of or assistance exercise for your glutes and hamstrings, but still focus on hip extension. So first off, actually, I'm just going to quickly show you this. So easiest way to load your back extensions, if you don't do this already, I've shared this a few times before, simply put a small plate on the floor, and then you can put your big plate on top, and you can grab underneath. It's much easier than using a dumbbell, which obviously has increments that you can't necessarily control as much. There might be 2.5 kilo or 5 pound increments that, you know, might be too big a jump. Whereas this, I can start out with the weight that I need. I can put, you know, little small micro plates on top just to provide that little bit of progressive overload, all right? So there's just a really quick tip. So a hamstring focused back extension to start off with. So I've already made sure that the height of my bench is set just below my hip crease so I can get that full range of motion out of it. I'm gonna maintain a slightly soft knee position here. Now, when we wanna focus on hamstrings, we're thinking about the back extension as though it were a Romanian deadlift. So once we get in that set position, and I'm not going to use the plate or any load to start off with, we're knees slightly soft, and we're thinking about pushing our hips back as we lower down, okay? So it's very, very similar to that Romanian deadlift. So it's hips back, 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 show your butt off to the person behind you, engage those hamstrings to raise back to the top. Try not to lock out your knees too much and kind of hang on those connective structures too much. So it's just nice, soft knees, so you're fully activating those hamstrings, hips back, and then through. You're also keeping your back relatively flat, so you're just hinging off of those hips, all right? So I'll give you a few reps with the plate. So as you can see, I can just easily grab that plate It's hips back, show my butt off to the person behind me, engage those hamstrings all the way to the top, nice flat back. Push those hips back, keep those hamstrings engaged, and then repeat. So I'm still kind of squeezing my glutes at the top, but I'm not so focused on those glutes. I'm more focused on engaging those hamstrings and hinging my hips. Now a glutes focused back extension. So with this one, I want to turn my toes just very slightly outwards. I've got that same position with that pad kind of just set with my hip crease, or my hip crease just above it, so I can kind of hinge over. Difference with this one, apart from turning those toes slightly out, is I'm going to purposely get some rounding kind of through my thoracic spine, okay? That just enables me to kind of lock off my lumbar a little bit, use that a little bit less, and it means I can engage those glutes a little bit harder. So I'm kind of going to more of a flexed position here, all the way down to that bottom position, engaging my glutes and keeping my chin tucked, rib cage down at the top. Also, think about these, rather than pushing your hips back a little bit like a Romanian deadlift, think about them as though they are a glute bridge or hip thrust. So your best cue for this one is to push your hips against that, almost as though it was a barbell in a glute bridge or a hip thrust. Push your hips against it to engage your hamstrings to raise up. So it's that similar kind of position to my hip thrust. Push my hips against the pad, raise all the way up, keeping that rounded kind of upper back, chin stays tucked. Obviously I can use my plate. So that's a more glutes focused back extension instead of hamstrings. Obviously this video is about hamstrings, building those. So you want to be focusing more on technique 1 that I showed instead of technique 2. If you want to build your glutes, fine. That's the technique, or technique 2, that you want to be using instead. So we've gone through some hip extension focused exercises. I'm also a big fan of good mornings. They're also excellent, providing obviously you're doing them safely. You've got a nice strong back as well, because some of those shear forces can be quite high in a good morning. They're also a good one. Pull throughs are an excellent one. I do, however, find the more advanced you get, or the stronger that you get, pull throughs are quite hard to load without that cable kind of pulling you back against it. So up to a certain point, pull throughs are also an excellent exercise in terms of building hip extension strength and building your hamstrings. You can also do back extensions using the glute ham raise. We've got one next to us here. So it's more of a horizontal position, which gets a little bit more glutes focus at the top. We're working more at shortened range at the top with our glutes, but also can be a good hamstrings builder. So let's go into the knee flexion focused exercises next to build your hamstrings. Okay, first exercise which we're going to be going through, which is more knee flexion focus, is the glute ham raise. Now, as far as programming goes, I wouldn't dive straight into some glute ham raises at the start of your workout because they are so challenging. You want to be making sure that your hamstrings are nice and warm before you do use these. So you might even do, for example, a set of hamstring curls just before you go onto here. It might just be 2 sets of hamstring curls just to warm up with before you go onto here. So next tip really is making sure that you've got the setup right. Now, the further up these pads are on your thighs, the easier it's gonna be, because it's obviously gonna change that lever arm, okay? So you just wanna be making sure that you adjust that according to your abilities. If it's too easy, you can take the pads a little bit further back. So for example, you can have your knees quite high up. If it's too hard, then you can kind of have those pads a little bit closer towards your hips if you want to as well. We can also assist this with a dowel, which I'm a big fan of. We can also use partner assistance. So where a partner pushes you on the way up and you just do the eccentric. You can even use some band assistance coming from behind if you have like a rack or something set behind you. Personally, it's a little bit extra. I wouldn't program something like that because it's a pain in the ass to set up. So if you're by yourself, dowel is the best method. So I'll take you through the assisted version to start off with, okay? So we're focusing on knee flexion with this. There's a few different ways to do this, but we're going to be focusing on knee flexion, okay? So we're in our start position. We've got our abs engaged. Our glutes are kind of locking off our hips, so our glutes are engaged as well. And all we're going to do is lower ourselves down to a point where we're relatively straight and then give ourselves a little bit of assistance, a little bit of a push away to get to the top. Do not come back up fully and so you're fully upright, okay? Because you're going to lose tension within those hamstrings. You're coming back up to a point where you're just still slightly coming forwards, okay? So all the way down, use that down, push, and then up about kind of 3/4. And again, up about 3/4. Obviously, once you get a little bit better at those, you can do body weight alone. So here, engage those hamstrings and come up. Or if you're really good at them, you can hold a dumbbell. You can also have a resistance band coming from down there. You can kind of wrap it around the dumbbell if you want to keep it on the floor, or you can kind of wrap it around the bottom of your glute ham raise and have that around kind of around your hands or around your neck if you want to, as another form of progressive overload, okay? So a few options for there. Glute ham raise is really excellent exercise for hypertrophy and as well for kind of athletes to build resilience and bulletproof hamstrings as well. Let's dive into exercise number 2, which focuses on knee flexion as well. Hamstring curls, in my opinion, are arguably top 1 or 2 exercises to build your hamstrings in isolation. So here, obviously, I'm on a prone hamstring curl. This is like a hammer strength kind of leverage kind of style hamstring curl. Both of these handles kind of work independently, if I'm being honest. Not a massive fan of this style of hamstring curl, but obviously for filming purposes, it works well for us today, all right? What's beneficial about this style of hamstring curl though actually, is that it does have a slight bend in the kind of the pad, which allows your hips to remain a little bit more in a flexed position. Because obviously we know our hamstrings work across those 2 joints, those hips and those knees. By taking those hips into more of a flexed position, whilst working on knee flexion at the same time, allows us to load those hamstrings a little bit more through that lengthened range as compared to most other machines that are more of a flat bench. You might be wondering why I've got a foam roller down here on the floor as well. If you are using a style of hamstring curl where this is a very, very flat bench, what you can do to kind of create a similar thing and put your hips into more of a slightly more flexed position is to simply use one of these foam rollers and you place it across your hips, okay? So obviously this isn't gonna work on this style of hamstring curl because it's already got that groove that we want. But if your bench is flat, you can imagine how that would hike your hips up into more of that flexed position and would help load those hamstrings. On here, it's just a little bit too high, okay? But there's a little bit of a trick from me if you need to kind of get around that. Now, in our hamstring curl, the main point here I really want you thinking about is to really brace yourself as hard as you can down into that bench, okay, or into that seat. So I use these. Look, if you've got this style, you can hold on here, you can hold on here. I honestly don't mind as long as you can really brace your abs down into that bench, okay? So brace those abs down. We're getting everything as static and stable as we possibly can. So we've got the nice base of support to work over to kind of allow us to isolate that knee flexion. So brace down hard, drive my heels into the back of those pads all the way to the top, work that shortened range as hard as we can, nice big squeeze, all the way down, full range of motion every time, and then repeat. Obviously this style of hamstring curl, each of the arms are independent, so we could do single leg if we want, obviously not like this, but single leg if we want to as well. You can do things like 2-1 method as well if you have a hamstring curl where both sides work at the same time. So you can raise with 2 legs, lower with 1, so you're working the eccentric. Really big fan on these to use what's called the isodynamic technique as well. So you might raise up to the top, hold for 10 to 20 seconds, really feel those hamstrings engaged, and then you work into your dynamic reps. So it's a really great technique to kind of build that mind-muscle connection with your hamstrings as well. There's lots of things you can do with a hamstring curl, which can kind of take things to the next level as well. But as I say, guys, nice basic exercise, but one you can really spend time on mastering and get some good improvements within your hamstrings. Last exercise I'm going to share with you to focus on knee flexion is a stability ball or Swiss ball hamstring curl. Now, I think that these are one of the most underrated exercises out there. I think a lot of people think that bodyweight exercises are beyond them. They're not challenging enough. They're not going to build, build enough hamstring or muscle tissue, whatever exercise that you're doing. But what I find actually is for anyone that I try these with, they're struggling to get a good set of 8 or 9 out of them with 2 legs. And then you've got to remember there's progressions off of these as well to make things more challenging. They're one of those exercises you could say they're functional, all right, because they obviously integrate some of those kind of stabilizers within there as well. So you've got some of those benefits as well to build kind of resilient and strong hamstrings, great for athletes as well. But for bodybuilders, physique athletes, excellent option, especially if you try them for the first time and you find that you're not very good at them. So we're just going to go over the 2-leg version to start off with. Now here's the biggest problem I see with these. Most people will go on here, they'll have their hands against the floor, okay, and they'll do this, right? So they're breaking at the hip. Now that's really, really easy to do, okay? And in my mind, you're cheating. So again, what we're trying to do here is we're trying to isolate knee flexion. So yes, we're going to engage our glutes a little bit with this one, but we're engaging our glutes to lock off our hips. So glutes engaged, lock off our hips, and then from there, we're isolating knee flexion, pushing our hips up all the way to the top, full range of motion all the way down, and then just finishing kind of that reverse plank position. So there, full range of motion and all the way down, okay? So there's 0 break at the hips. If those are too easy, switch to single leg, okay? So one leg can be up there, you've got that hip locked off on one side, hips come up, knees, hips and shoulders are kind of relatively in line at the top, and then you can go there. You can even try like a mechanical drop set. So you can go, for example, one leg into the other leg. So you might do, say, I don't know, a set of 8 on each side, and then straight into that 2-leg variation, almost as like a kind of a drop set of these as well. I'm also a big fan of doing iso holds with these. So you can go into like a long bridge, hold into that position as well. Obviously we're engaging that kind of gastrocnemius, that portion of our calves as well. So you can hold, get that engagement, and then you can reset and go into your dynamic reps straight afterwards as well. So you've got a few options there that you can play about with your stability ball hamstring curls. Give them a go. Honestly, they're one of the most underrated exercises out there. Type of exercise you can kind of sprinkle in to the end of your workout and have a good little finisher for your hamstrings as well. Okay, so we've gone over 6 main exercises there, focusing on both that hip extension component and knee flexion component of our hamstrings. So from a programming perspective, my first tip is to make sure you integrate both within your own training, and that can be on the same day, same week, whatever. It doesn't make too much of a difference as long as you're accumulating the volume over the entire week on both of those exercises. So we're working all functions of your hamstrings, okay? So both types of exercises within the same training plan, all right? The next thing I kind of want to discuss really quickly, or just kind of breeze over, is one of the recent kind of trends I'm seeing with people poo-pooing pre-fatigue, all right? Now, hamstrings are one of the muscles that work really well when you pre-fatigue them at the start of a workout. So what I mean by that is, for example, you could do a set of hamstring curls, or you can do multiple sets of hamstring curls. So let's say 3 sets of hamstring curls, working sets, and then you would go on to some Romanian deadlifts after that one. So you've pre-fatigued your hamstrings in isolation before integrating them into more of a compound multi-joint lift afterwards. Now, the reason why some people are poo-pooing that pre-fatigue method, which has been around for years and years, anecdotally, we know that it works. But the reason why some people are poo-pooing it is because, I'm very, very aware, by the way, I keep saying poo-poo. The reason why a lot of people are poo-pooing it is because of some research that came out to basically say, if you pre-fatigue a synergist muscle, so for example, if I pre-fatigue my hamstrings with some hamstring curls, and then I go into my Romanian deadlifts, what I'm actually doing is increasing activation of one of the muscles that works alongside the hamstrings rather than the hamstrings themselves. So for example, by working some hamstring curls before I do my Romanian deadlifts, all I'm doing is increasing activation in my glutes in the Romanian deadlift, so making it a less effective exercise for our hamstrings. What you need to keep in mind is that activation is not an indicator of how good that exercise is or how good that structure of workout is for building muscle. The way I see this is very, very, very simple. To optimally build muscle, we want to be working within roughly about 1 to 2 reps of failure within the exercise, for 1 set, 2 set, 3 sets, whatever, okay? So we want to really be challenging ourselves. And yeah, by the way, you don't always need to be going close to failure to build muscle. However, from experience and from what I can see from the data as well, getting closer to failure will build more muscle. So by pre-fatiguing your hamstrings, which is something I'm a big fan of. So for example, doing some hamstring curls before doing your Romanian deadlifts, your hamstrings have been pre-fatigued, which means that when you go to your Romanian deadlifts, your hamstrings are more likely to be the muscle that gives out early, regardless of the activation that's going on, look, if we're getting some extra glutes activation, that's a massive win, right? Okay, but it's not an indicator that it's a less effective strategy as far as formatting our workouts go for our hamstrings. We're pre-fatiguing our hamstrings, so we go to an exercise where we can now feel our hamstrings work even more, and our hamstrings are more likely to be the reason why we fail within that exercise as well, okay? We can get closer to that 1 to 2 reps in reserve by the end of our set to optimally use that, to build muscle, okay? So that's my take on the whole thing. As I said, I'm a big fan of that pre-fatigue method. Doesn't necessarily mean you have to be using it, but I'd say, for most people that have problems building their hamstrings, it's a really great strategy to use. Anyway, guys, we'll end things there with this video. Make sure you stay tuned and subscribe to the YouTube for future videos. Lots more content coming out recently. I've got one out on mechanical drop sets that's been out recently. So if you haven't seen that, check that one out. But we've got a lot more content coming in the future. And always remember as well, if you're looking for online coaching to work with someone personally that will have your back, a coach in your corner that will literally take all the guesswork out of your training, your nutrition, make sure you're getting the results that your time and effort deserve, then make sure you head to the link in the description where you can book a consultation call with one of myself or one of my team as well at the Elite Physique Training link. Anyway, check you guys out soon, and I will see you at the link in bio.